We're live.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the ICHRRF Speaking Up series. Those of you who registered, they probably registered on our Eventbrite page. My name is Dr. Adityanjee, and on behalf of the Board of Directors and the executive team of the ICHRRF, I invite all of you to yet another lecture/webinar in the ICHRRF Speaking Up series. It's a monthly series with difficult issues. And this is the logo of the ICHRRF. ICHRRF stands for the International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom. It is a US-based nonprofit organization focused on upholding human rights and religious freedom through continuous monitoring, policy intervention, and collaboration. We are focused on educational, research, legal, and human rights advocacy and charitable purposes, and strive to be an advocate for the human rights and religious freedom of underrepresented communities across the world. We do believe that humankind can no longer afford to be selectively vocal about the rights of only a specific group of people. A humane and just world necessitates fair treatment of all living creatures. Our focus is on the indigenous rights and freedom, free speech, and cultural preservation of indigenous communities. Some of our initiatives include monitoring violations of the freedoms and sanctity of religious and philosophical minorities across the world, research into and documentation of the culture, history, challenges faced by such communities, policy recommendations on human rights, religious diversity, and pluralism to international organizations, agencies, national and local governments, collaboration to support the cultural and philosophical diversity across the world, conducting special hearings on human rights violations. We have a Ved P. Nanda Memorial Fellowship Training Program. We are doing Garden Genocide Convention on an annual basis, and we promote publication of books through the ICHRRF Press. Topic for today's webinar is persecution of Meitei Hindus in Manipur. Just for record, today is April 21st, Sunday, 10 a.m. in the Eastern Standard Time in United States, and it is around 7:30 p.m. in India, where state of Manipur is located. So just to orient our audience, this shows you the map of India, especially the northeast India, where state of Manipur is located. And the next map is going to show the location of the state of Manipur in relation to the neighboring country of Myanmar and the adjoining two states of Nagaland and Mizoram. Both these states are ethnically tribal predominant, Mizoram and Nagaland. Manipur has its own religious and ethnic demography, but the state is surrounded by predominantly two Christian tribal states of India. Again, it shows you the map of the state of Manipur. The capital is Imphal, which is a valley. It is surrounded by a hilly area, which is actually around 85% of the geography. Imphal Central Valley is 10 to 15%. And this shows again the map of Manipur. I want you to focus on this particular area called Chuda Chandpur, because there is some issues pertaining to that. Again, it shows you the districts of Manipur. There are 16 districts in the state of Manipur. It shows you the religious topography of the state of Manipur. This light brown area is predominantly the central Imphal Valley, which is predominantly Hindu. Vaishnava tradition, where most of the Meitei people live. Surrounding are hilly areas, which are almost 90% of the state's geography. And this is multiple ethnicities, at least 34 tribes, which include Naga, which need Kuki, Chin, so various tribes that are predominantly Christian. The topic today was persecution of Meitei Hindus in Manipur, and we had these two speakers originally. Their pictures are there. So the whole webinar is on persecution and the challenges of Manipur's indigenous Hindu community. The discussion covers relationship with Manipur's indigenous Hindu religious tradition as well as other tribal communities, especially the Kuki tribes and illegal immigrants and trained fighters from Myanmar in the region. Followed by the presentations, there will be discussion and Q&A. The literal meaning of word Manipur is the city of holy June, and it is referenced in the ancient Hindu epic of Mahabharata, where it is referred to as Manipura. It's a province of great natural beauty and strategic importance in India's far east or northeast, bordering the state of the country of Myanmar. The indigenous people of Manipur, the Meiteis, have a long history in the region and a rich spiritual tradition of Vaishnava Hinduism. In recent times, a complex web of narcotics trafficking, criminal nexus, militant fanaticism, and infiltration by Kuki tribesmen from across the border from Myanmar has created an increasingly violent environment for the indigenous Meiteis. Unfortunately, Western media and Western NGOs have aided the invasion with one-sided reportage, casting the drug mafias and religious extremists and the trained foreign fighters as the persecuted party and the Meiteis as the aggressors. So since we focus on marginalized minorities, marginalized indigenous communities in the ICHRRF, we are going to discuss the plight of persecuted Meitei Hindus in Manipur that have been oppressed. We had two Meitei American speakers who were supposed to speak on the history and present challenges faced by this tiny community. Our original panelists were Dr. Rajesh Kesham, PhD in sociology, specializing in gender studies and social anthropology. She focuses on social issues, particularly gender dynamics and cultural anthropology. As a former UNESCO researcher, she has illuminated challenges faced by children across cultures, informing policy recommendations. She's a fervent advocate for social justice and empowering marginalized communities, inspiring social challenge. Our second regional panelist was Dr. Billy Guarino, who teaches at St. Anselm College. She previously worked as an assistant professor at JMI Delhi and University of Delhi in India. She worked on resistance movements in India and Myanmar for her doctoral thesis. She is co-editing a literally reimagining of the Me Too in South Asia and diaspora with Dr. Nidhi Srivastava and Dr. Ruma Sinha, which is under contract by Lexington Books. Her first monograph is on insurgency, gendered violence, and social movements in northeastern India. Her research examines inclusive pedagogy vis-a-vis minority literatures, feminist security studies, migration, conflict, insurgency in South and Southeast Asia. I am very sorry to say that because of threats to their personal safety and security, both the original panelists were forced to withdraw from this panel discussion. Dr. Billy went incommunicado almost a week ago, and last night at 10 p.m. we received a message from Dr. Rajshri that she, considering all the factors, considering the security of her family and threats coming from the terrorist groups, has decided to withdraw from the panel discussion. As we say, the show must go on. So ICHRRF will continue with this originally planned panel discussion on the poor plight and persecution of Meitei Hindus. And we have arranged for alternative panelists. And this is our first alternative panelist. He is Mr. Rajesh Gogna, Esquire. Mr. Rajesh Gogna is a lawyer by profession. He is also involved with the human rights movement. He is Secretary General of Human Rights Defense International, or ICHRRF. Mr. Gogna has been involved in human rights activism for a long period of time and has presented papers at many international conferences. His organization, ICHRRF, has taken up the cause of religious minorities in Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka, as well as Hindu and Sikh refugees from Pakistan. ICHRRF continuously supports the cause of Baha'is who are being persecuted in Iran. He is an expert in partition studies, refugees law, and the challenges faced by the stateless people. Mr. Gogna is closely observing the ongoing conflict in Manipur, India, and the challenges posed by a continuous influx of well-armed and well-trained Kuki insurgents into the neighboring states of Mizoram and Manipur from Myanmar. And our second special panelist is Mr. Clemens. And I am very delighted to inform you that Mr. Clemens is the Executive Director of the ICHRRF. He is also the coordinator for Professor Vaishnava Memorial Fellowship Training in Human Rights. Paul has contributed as an author to articles and books on subjects at intersection of public policy, information technology, and contemporary and historical, religious, or ideological currents in society. He has co-authored a book on language and education policy, focusing on history of discriminatory language policies in India, US, Iran, and China. He has advocated for a fair narrative on the past and present turmoil surrounding the Sikh and Baloch communities in South Asia, and has helped compile and analyze statistics on human rights violations in that region. Professionally, he works in the field of information technology and is a student of Persian and classical Sanskrit. He is a polyglot. He knows a number of languages, and that is to his credibility. Before we start the actual discussion by the panelists, there are a few housekeeping rules. I would request everyone to stay on mute to avoid noise interference. Please also change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. Please don't interrupt our esteemed panelists. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to ask questions. No anonymous questioners, please. All the questions are moderated through the chat room, so they have to be sent to the chat room, and we will be reading those questions at the end. Please be precise and specific in asking your questions. Please don't send lengthy comments in the form of a monologue. Lastly, we are recording this event. It would be available on our website as an educational resource material for the future. Within next 24 hours, it would also be available on the YouTube channel for ICHRRF. Without further ado, it's my great honor and pleasure in inviting Mr. Rajesh Gogna to give his opening remarks. Rajesh, please. Kindly unmute yourself. Kindly unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Adityanjee. Am I audible now? Fine. Okay. Thank you very much for his nice words and inviting me for this conference. Only today in the morning, Dr. Adityan called me, and at that time he told me that I am to speak on the influx of the refugees from Myanmar, the neighboring state of Mizoram and Manipur, and its impact and the policy of the government of India in this regard. But as he just informed me that I am to begin this discussion, so I think we directly go to that issue of refugees and its impact on the neighboring state and the government of India. I will give a little introduction of the conflict because I was I was not ready to that. I would be introducing the conflict. So it is, as we know, it's going on from the last more than 1 year now. Manipur is a very small state of India, very small, and the total population is not more than 10 million. Uh, exactly number I won't be able to say because I was not that ready. So what had happened that last year there was a conflict. Suddenly a conflict erupted where there was a ongoing controversies between the Kuki community as well as the um, uh, Meitei community. And as per the information which is available in the public domain, the Meitei community was focusing on the capital city, and they are having almost 60-70% population of Manipur, and their focus in the capital city was there. And whereas the hill areas are concerned, there the Kukis were dominating. So Kukis population is much less than the Meiteis, around 30 to 35%. And as it is being claimed by the Meitei community that they are now dominating as many as 80% of the hill area, and for that reason, the Meitei people are just confined to the capital city and don't have any access to the lands and the other resources of the state of Manipur. Whereas the Kuki community that they're in the hill areas. So hill areas are not land is not as easily available as it is available in the city area. So they say that our confinement to the 80% of the land, which is the hill area, is little different than the occupation of the land by the Meiteis. So this conflict was going on from the last many decades, but very silently, very peacefully. There were some controversies. Kukis were claiming that their developments are not taking place. Almost all the medical colleges, all the educational institutions, all the hospitals, all the major corporate houses were there in the capital city. So they never had any easy access to any one of them. So if a Kuki student is to study medicine or social sciences or other engineering, then he will have to travel for about 200-300 kilometers to be in the capital city and study there. This disturbed the demography of the capital city of this Manipur. And what happened that in a area, particular area, there was a concentration of the Meitei population, and in a different area, there was a concentration of the Kuki population. I must tell you that there is also a impact of religious demography, as almost 90% of the Meiteis are practicing Hindus, Vaishnavas, and almost equal number of Kukis are practicing Christians. So two different faith systems were also existing over there, and two different communities were practicing them, and there was an ongoing conflict between both of them since decades. Some people say it was existing since centuries. Sorry, uh, should I continue, doctors? Dr.
Uh,
Aditya, should I continue or there's some interruption?
yes, sir. Please continue. I would request everybody to please mute themselves. Thank you.
Please mute MC.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you very much. So now we have a situation where in a very small city, there is concentration of two different racial communities, two different religions are being practiced, and they are coexisting, but both of them are under the pressure. The Meiteis are under the pressure because they believe that they are having more than 60% of the population of Manipur, but the land available to them is not more than 20% of the total land. The Meiteis were saying, the Kukis were saying, we are around 30% of the total population, but we are just concentrating on the hill area, and we don't have the access to the quality education, quality medical services. So this conflict was ongoing. Suddenly, last year, the riots started taking place because it started with some inauguration of a museum which was who was a Meitei hero. So when the inauguration was taking there, some Meiteis objected to it, and they say that it was a peaceful demonstration, a peaceful agitation. That then peaceful agitation turned into violence. There was a lot of violence in the neighboring state of the capital city, and this violence came to the main capital city. And for about 3 days, as they claim, as many as 3,000 houses were burned down. A large number of temples were burned down. They were razed, and a large number of churches were also affected by this violence. And in this violence, what happened that suddenly, what happened in Manipur has never happened in any part of the world, because within 3 days, the 100% Kuki population left capital city of Manipur. Then even the chief of the police commissioner, he had to leave because he was a Kuki. Most of the police officers, medical officers, army officers, they left the capital city. They went to the hill areas, and all the Meiteis who happened to be the Hindus, they were driven out of the hill area, and they came to the capital city or the neighboring areas. As I'm associated with the School of Partition Studies and also with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, when we have discussions about the partition, we say that this kind of partition has never happened in the history of mankind, where there was a total separation or partition of the two different communities, one Kuki and Meiteis, one Christians and Hindus, and this like so. And the situation became like this, that the Assam Rifles and the Indian Army had to stand in between the borders of the Meitei population and Kuki population so that they don't cross the borders. So there was a border. There is a border within India between not two states, between not two countries, between two communities. So this situation emerged, and it is not, as that Adityanjee was indicating about, that it is not simple that two communities started fighting each other, started firing at each other, started violence against each other, but there was some history behind it. And as people say that in hilly areas, there is a lot of poppy cultivation. Almost because it is a golden triangle, Myanmar, Manipur, Mizoram. So it is a golden triangle where the poppy cultivation is there, the drug cartel is there. So in the hilly areas, almost 60 to 70% of the total production of the drugs or the poppy cultivation is in that area. And they say that this Kuki population, because they were holding the hilly areas over there, so they were also holding this trade. And because they were holding this trade, they never wanted any development to be there in that area. They didn't want that any police post should be established in those areas. They didn't want that the army should have their post in that area. So that way, not the Kuki people, because Kuki people want to study, want to learn, want to perform better in their life. So not the general Kuki people were involved in these kind of activities, but the drug cartel was very active. And this drug cartel never wanted that development should take place or the state should play an active role over there. Then the present dispensation in the Manipur, when they were part of they were worried about this golden triangle, they started pushing some kind of restrictions on this poppy cultivation and other drug activities. So when this process started, it had a reaction. It had a reaction not only in the hill areas, it also had a reaction in the capital city. And then the conflicts started taking place, and conflicts suddenly erupted to that extent that within 3 to 4 days of violence, there was a total division, there was a total partition between the Meiteis and Kukis, between the Hindus and Christians, and between two different races, as they call it. And a very unfortunate thing has taken place, and it becomes more critical because Meiteis are almost 60 to 70% of the total population of Manipur. They are having almost 60 to 70% of the member of legislative assemblies. They have almost all the resources at their disposal, but they cannot travel out of the capital city. The focus and concentration of the total population is there. When you are concentrated in the capital city, a particular city, and you don't have access to the land resources and other resources of the state, so there was a kind of frustration amongst the Meitei community, and they wanted that they should also be allowed to establish their establishment, their business houses, their hospitals in the hilly areas. But then there was a protection which was being provided to the hill area people or the tribal areas. So this protection is there by the Constitution of India, because if you declare a particular area to be hill area, then it has got a special provisions of the law, special provisions of the Constitution, which protect their identity, which also protects that other communities cannot come to that area, so that their identity remains intact. Tribal identity, as we call it, because Kukis are tribals, no doubt about it. Some people say that even the Meiteis are tribals. There is also no doubt about it. So then Meiteis started claiming that we are also tribals. So this particular conflict, because Meiteis for all the times were claiming that they are upper class Hindus, Kshatriyas, and because they were rulers, then because of the frustration of the restrictions of land, restrictions of resources, they started claiming that we are also tribals, we also should be given land in the hill areas. So this demand of the Meiteis for the land in the hill areas, to the access of the hill areas, and continuous drug cartels putting a pressure that no state agencies or individuals should join there. This conflict was going on from the last 2, 3, 4 years when the new government was there under the leadership of Mr. Biren, and suddenly it has taken this violence has taken place, and it has impacted the, as they call it, the Hindu community of the capital city, because of the reason that now they are confined to a particular city. The total Hindu population of Manipur is confining itself to the capital city. It is like a big jail where the resources are limited, where the access to the other state is not there, because most of the roads are being occupied by the Kukis. They come on the roads, they cover it, and then even the look at the situation has taken place that the Manipur police is not allowed to move out of the boundary area of the capital city. Have you ever heard in the history of mankind where the police of the capital city or state police is not allowed to enter into Kuki areas? The state police is not allowed to enter into Kuki areas because Kukis claim that if they enter into our area, then they are threat to our life, and they are ready with their guns. And the most dangerous thing is that in that Manipur state, there are as many as 20 militant groups. 20 militant groups recognized by the government of India. And they are in the talks with the government of India. In these groups, as many as 12 groups or 13 groups are Kukis groups. So they have an understanding with the government of India. And because of that understanding, they laid down their arms, and the arms are in the control of the government of Manipur or the central government. Amongst the Meiteis, there were also militant groups, and now this separation of population and the presence of the highly trained and motivated militant groups in that area has further complicated the situation. And because in the morning, Mr. Adityan told me the influx of the refugees. So now I will shift from the Manipur to the border areas, because we have Myanmar by the side of the Manipur. Myanmar is a disturbed area, as we know that this coup of 2021 is there, and there is a conflict is going on between the Chin community and the Myanmar army and the people who are pro-democracy. Because of this conflict, because the Chin are in the border, Chin community are in the border of the Myanmar and Mizoram. So they belong to the same race. They speak the same language. They have the same culture. So then started a lot of violence in Myanmar by the military, lot of violence in Manipur, a conflict between the Meiteis and the Kukis. Then around 30,000 Chin Kukis entered into the state of Mizoram. 30. It's a small state. Even the entry of 5,000 can just disturb the total fabric and structure of the particular state. So 30,000 Chin population, Myanmar population, they entered into the state of Mizoram. Mizoram people say they are our brothers and sisters. We belong to the same community. We belong to the same race. We speak the same language. So we will entertain them. So there are about 160 refugees camps. When I say refugees, then it is not correct, because in India we don't have we are not signatory to the refugee convention. So as we are not signatory to the refugee convention, we don't have refugee laws. As we don't have the refugee laws, we don't have even the refugee policies. So such a porous border is existing between Mizoram, Manipur, and Myanmar, that if a large section of people are coming from Myanmar to Mizoram, there is no one to stop them. And as the government of India is not having policy about the refugees, Indian army cannot shoot at them, because if they shoot them at the border, then there's a lot of unrest in Mizoram, which is still remains to be a peaceful state. There is already a lot of violence in Manipur. So now 30,000 refugees from Myanmar have entered India, are in the state of Mizoram. About 15,000 Jain refugees or Kuki refugees have entered into Manipur, the Kuki side of Manipur. So now we have around 45,000. People claim it can be more than that. So this large number of refugees from Myanmar is there. And keep in mind that these Kukis or Chin people of Myanmar are not ordinary peasants or workers. Some of them, I don't see that all of them, some of them are highly trained guerrillas. They had been attacking India, they had been attacking the Myanmar people since decades. So a large number of highly trained guerrillas have just very smoothly and seamlessly entered into the India, and Indian government and the Indian forces were not having any infrastructure or policy or guidelines that how to handle this large section of 45 people entering from Myanmar to India. So this has led into a very critical situation in Mizoram, which is a very small state. 30,000 people are there. Government of India is trying to provide some help to the Myanmar people on the other side of the border, because they don't want influx of more refugees. But government of India is not doing a lot about it, and it is basically the church of Mizoram, or the NGOs which are helping them. Even in the Manipur, the non-government organizations are helping those people. But the totality of circumstances is that in this part of India and this part of the world, the majority community of Manipur, which was always a very peaceful community, which was always obeyed the laws, which was never into armed conflicts, now it is being cornered. It is being cornered at the behest of the community, which is deep into drug cartels, which is deep into drug trade, which is deep into terrorist activities, which is having most sophisticated arms in the world. So when there's a conflict between the Manipur police and the Kuki militants, the arms which are being held by the Manipur the Kuki militants are much more sophisticated by the arms which is being held by sorry uh, uh, arms which are being held by the Manipur police. So this is the situation. It is very critical, very pathetic. And for Hindus, as generally people say that even despite of being a majority community, we live under the threat of the minority community. It is happening in most part of the country, but it is a live demonstration in Manipur, where the majority community is confined to a jail, and it is going to remain in jail for the coming, say, 5, 6, 7, 10 years. I conclude here. If there are questions, I may respond to them.
Thank you, Rajesh Gogna, for coming at the last moment and making this presentation so we could go with the discussion. I'm really very, very thankful to you for your can-do spirit and being available at the last moment. Now it's my distinct honor and privilege to invite our Executive Director, Mr. Carl Clemens, who will make his presentation, and this will be followed by Q&A and discussion. So Carl, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, or good evening. So my comments also will be brief. Let me just share a few slides. I threw a few slides together overnight.
Carl, but you had the night. Carl, but you had the night to prepare your slides. I got the information at 11 o'clock in the morning.
Thank you very much, sir, for making this happen. Is my screen visible? Okay. So what I will do in the next 10 or 15 minutes is just throw some light on the religious angle, the religious and cultural angle of the dimensions of the conflict over here. Now, at the outset, let me say that this is not a religious conflict per se. This is not a religious conflict, fundamentally speaking. It is not. However, if you look at the arc of history, you'll see that a religious divide has started to play more and more of a role as time goes on, especially from a Kuki perspective. So we'll take a look at that. But let's start off with some basic background. So historically, for the last 2,000 years, over 2,000 years, there has been coexistence between the Meitei rulers in Manipur and the Kuki subalterns. So the Kukis are basically, as Mr. Gogna just mentioned, they're basically co-ethnic with the Chan people, so-called Chan people of Burma. The Lushais also, they've been called the Kukis in the Indian, the Far East of India. They're all basically co-ethnic with one another. You can think of it like Afghanistan, different tribal confederations in Afghanistan. And of course, they're divided by clan and so forth, and they have their clan rivalries and everything, and they divide into different dialects and so forth. But basically, they form one large ethnicity. You can think of it like the Pashtuns of Afghanistan, or to give a Western example, like Scotland. They have their own clans and their ancient rivalries and vendettas and so forth, but basically they are one large ethnicity. In fact, the Kukis themselves tend to use Scotland a lot. They seem to identify with that country for reasons that we'll see as we go forward. So for the last 2,000 years, there's been coexistence between a more urbanized agrarian Meitei ethnicity, Hindu Meitei ethnicity, and the animist. They were mainly animist for the longest time, sort of proto-Hindu Buddhist animist Kukis in the region. So for instance, as far back as 33 AD, which is the first historically recorded king of the Meiteis, Nongba Lairin Pakhangba, he captured power, and in his capture of power, he had Kuki support. He used them as part of his troops, some mercenaries and warlords. And as recently as 1810, when the Meitei king Chorajit, he sought help from the Kukis to fight the Burmese army. So we can see that for 2,000 years, there's been some kind of a symbiotic relationship between the two, and mostly peaceful coexistence. On the other hand, we see, even in modern times, even in very recent times, there's been extreme, heinous violence between the Kukis and the Nagas in India, both of who are Christianized tribes. So that's intra-Christian violence. So that just highlights the fact that the violence that we see in India's northeast is not really religion-based. It has many other dimensions to it. But specifically between the Meitei and the Kukis, there's been peaceful coexistence for most of the time. So what has changed exactly? So first, let's look at the boundary issue. So the area of Manipur has pretty much most of the time been under kingdoms that we identify as Meitei kingdoms for the last centuries, 2,000 years almost. And then the Treaty of Yandabu fixed the boundary between Manipur and Burma. That was signed by the British and the Burmese after the first Anglo-Burmese War. That was a boundary that the British created, and then they guarded it pretty jealously. Then after independence, Manipur, that area was a union territory, and then it was only in 1972 that it attained its full statehood. Now, under British rule, starting about 1894, there began very concerted, coordinated efforts to Christianize the Kukis and several of the other tribes in that area. And that included not just British and the Welsh, not just the English and the Welsh and the Scots, but also American Baptist missions. It's kind of very interesting to note that. So I wanted to throw that, kind of highlight that on the slide, that the Americans were directly coordinating with the British Empire in the Christianization of certain tribes in that area. However, the tribes over there, including the Kukis, were very resistant to any kind of missionary activity, and that missionary push in that area only resulted in raising tensions between the tribes and the Kukis and the Anglos. That ultimately resulted in the Anglo-Kuki War, 1917 to 1919. And there they were decisively defeated. They were occupied. They were completely subjugated by the British. And that opened the doors for the actual Christianization to begin on a large scale amongst the Kukis. So part of it was because of their total physical and material subjugation. And part of it was also psychological. The records show that some of the Kukis, they just felt that since they lost so badly in the war, therefore the God of the British must be greater than their gods. So that's how it started. It's a kind of similar story to what one hears in South Korea and other parts. So there was a massive Christianization that happened there. Now, that area has always been multi-religious. You had the animists, you had the Hindus, you had the Buddhists, but there was always a kind of a fluid relationship between all of them. So multi-religiosity in that area had never been a problem. However, with the increase of Christianization in the area, all of a sudden, a new dimension has been added to tribal conflict in that area. A part of this is because Christianity isn't just a religion. It comes with a certain culture. It's been a complete uprooting of tribal culture in that area, and a sort of being supplanted by Western culture, especially Anglo-American culture in that area. And when we talk about Western culture, we're not talking about people there listening to Mozart, but rather we're talking about certain aspects of Western popular culture, a lot of which tends to not be very healthy. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of thing. So, this was a last minute thing. So I thought the best thing would be to show you a quick clip of the pop culture of the Manipuri Meiteis and contrast that with the Christian cultures in the Northeast India. I took one from the Mizo Christian culture. You can see a picture over here. This is a Hindu Meitei lady, and this is a Mizo Christian. A lot of, they take off the South Korean models and completely westernized. They're going from tribal to completely westernized, and over there, modernization equals westernization in their eyes. On the other hand, you see the Meitei lady over here, very comfortable in their own skin, very, So I wanted to just share a video. I think that might give you an even better idea, because it's not just about dressing and it's about, there's a certain vibe that contrasts. And you might get an idea of why, say, a Meitei family might not want Kuki culture to come into their locality. It's like the drugs aspect is of course extremely prominent out here, but there are other aspects too. So I'll just show a few seconds of two different videos. Is the video visible right now, Dr. Adityanjee? Okay. So this is a popular song. It's a Manipuri Meitei pop song. It was high on the charts, so I'll just play that for a few seconds. Okay, so I don't know if you could hear the audio, but basically a very folksy tune. There are festivals, Hindu festivals, and generally upbeat, simple-hearted kind of spirit. Now we look at.
Sound is not being shared. The video is visible, but the sound is not being shared.
That's fine. It's not a big deal. I'll share a few seconds now of a Mizo pop video. This one was high on the charts, so we'll take a look at it. Few seconds. So, so one thing that clearly might have come out over there, even if the sound was not very clear, is that the second video, the Mizo video, is just basically, it's just like Western music, Western, everything about it is Western. And on the Mizo side, everything's, and on the Manipuri side, everything is very ethnic, it's very indigenous, right? So that's one aspect that has created a very stark cultural contrast in India's northeastern area that happens to have a religious angle to it. Christianization is bringing in Westernization. It creates not just the influx of a drug culture, but also rock and roll and a sexually licentious kind of culture. So you can imagine the kind of social ostracism that will start engendering in society. Now, let's look at Western narratives on the Manipur-Myanmar boundary and the migration across that boundary. So if you look at old British gazettes and British colonial gazettes and their records, they were very jealous about that border. They wanted to contain any kind of in-migration from Burma into the Indian part. So they always talked about the old Kuki and the new Kuki. The old Kuki being those Kuki who were already settled in Manipur for centuries and who were part of the fabric over there. And the new Kuki were those who would try to come over the border from Myanmar, Burma, into the Indian state of Manipur. So pre-Christianization, so pre-1919, when Christianization really started picking up, the Western narrative sought to contain the Kuki immigration into Manipur. However, post-Christianization, the Western narrative favors the open border. It's flipped the other way. The other thing is, as Mr. Gogna mentioned, there's no shortage of militant groups over there, including Kuki militant groups. I just took one example over here. The Kuki National Army was founded 1988. Its goal was to create a separate state administered by the Kuki people, India and Myanmar. But that group has had a truce with the government of India for about 15 years now, until it erupted, virus erupted again last year. Significantly, if you look at their literature and even their online presence and the way they present themselves to the world, the group, for some reason, showcases a crusader spirit against China. So it's not just India and Myanmar, but they're talking a lot about China for some reason in that region. That might give you some idea of the geopolitical forces that they are either beholden to or that they're trying to impress. Okay. The Kuki National Army leader, P.S. Haukip, he's written books, and he talks a lot about his religious motivations. He's influenced by the Scottish evangelist Reverend John Knox, who famously prayed, "Give me all of Scotland or I die." In other words, to Christianize an entire area. So he sees himself as a crusader. He sees himself as very much in religious terms. And all the wars that he has fought and everything that has happened so far, he sees it in very, very Christian terms, very Old Testament Christian terms, Judeo-Christian terms, you could say that. That's not really the case on the Meitei side, at least not so far. But on this side, like even on the social media since last year, if you look at the Kuki side, full of biblical tropes and full of talking about waging a holy war. So I'll end with this the US angle to it. You see that, I've met several American evangelical pastors who have been to that area, parts that even Indian citizens would rather not go to. But American pastors seem to go in and out of the area without any problem at all. Speaking to them and also looking at the literature online, you see there's a lot of US-based evangelical Judeo-Christian myth-making for Asian Christians. Some of it makes it into mainstream media as well. For instance, a lot of the Kukis and many other tribes in that area, they now consider themselves to be lost tribes of Israel. They actually believe that. And you'll see that US-based Lost Tribes Institute holds like a scientific symposium, and you can take that word with heaps of salt. The interconnectedness of Israelites in Asia. So this idea of newly converted Christians identifying with lost tribes of Israel is not new. It happened in Europe centuries back. Different, especially, they also came from a very tribal kind of background. Each of them identified that, oh no, we are this biblical tribe and we are that biblical tribe and so forth. So this is the same template being repeated over here as well. But they actually believe it, and they have a very, very Old Testament crusader kind of spirit. And a lot of the strings are being pulled from here within the United States as well. So I wanted to bring that geopolitical dimension, which works directly through religious networks in that area. So that's what I wanted to end with. Just to throw some light on the religious angle over here. While the conflict is not currently a religious conflict, I wanted to shed light on the religious angle that is increasingly playing a role as history moves on. So with that, I'll hand it back to Dr. Adityanjee. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. And thank you, Rajesh ji, for coming at the last moment. I am waiting for some questions from the audience, and while the questions come, I will make few comments before going on to the questions. Both of you have highlighted certain aspects, but I'll add to that about Indian Northeast. In 1956, the then Prime Minister Nehru had an accord with Christian missionaries in which a carte blanche was given to Christian missionaries to evangelize and Christianize India's Northeast exclusively. It is funny that government of India a secular government of India will enter into this accord. It was a duly signed accord between the Prime Minister and some Christian missionaries, especially working in Nagaland region. Second issue is that India-Myanmar border. India-Myanmar border is 1,600 kilometers long. And as I was talking about, that it's not just a Manipur, it's the state of Nagaland, it's the state of Mizoram that share the borders, and Assam as well. This border is porous, although it is defined, but it is porous. And bilateral agreement, the residents in the border village can travel 16 kilometers into each other territory without requiring visa or passport. The tribal groups have family relationships and marital relationships across the border because you don't need a visa for 16 kilometers. Now, this kind of arrangement has encouraged very new Kuki migration into India's Northeast because you don't need visa. That 2021 military coup by the junta in Myanmar after the new elections led to a situation where tribal warfare within various tribes in Myanmar, also warfare between the Myanmar military junta and some of the rebel groups. And since the word geopolitics was mentioned, the major conflict there is Chinese government that is arming every side to the teeth. There's illegal arm trade, there's drug trade, there is poppy cultivation going on. And any attempts to control the poppy population by Indian government agencies leads to more drug trafficking, more arms trafficking, more militant intrusion into Indian territories, and local civil conflict. So there have been waves of Kuki migration into Manipur, although it is said that they have been there for very long years, but those were the old Kukis. The newer migrants who are illegal, they include trained fighter soldiers with very sophisticated arms. And unfortunately, in this conflict, the Western media, the Western press, and Western-based human rights organizations have tried to portray it exclusively as Hindu versus Christian strife and have opened a war on Meitei Hindus who are basically confined to the Central Valley of Impal, surrounded by hilly terrain where armed trained fighters are brandishing guns and light machine guns. So this is worse than being in an open air jail. The Hindu Meitei population is sitting ducks to be slaughtered. and the international media and Western-based human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch have exclusively blamed one side and not looked at the totality of the situation. That's why we had to have this webinar, try to clarify the situation. There is a lot of illegal arms trade from Myanmar. There's a particular city near China from which there's a illegal arms trade lifeline that goes on to India's northeast. So with those comments, I will start taking some of the questions that have been put in there. There's a question by Rachna. It says, I'm wondering what kind of conversion strategy do people use so that these indigenous converted people become enemies of their own people and their own country? Maybe Carl, you can address that question.
So I asked the same question. I had asked the same question to a pastor from Indianapolis who has been there. So one of the things, see, apart from actual accords, observed kind of accords that Dr. Adityanjee just referenced, the entire popular culture in that part of India is controlled by evangelical Christians, both from the US and the Anglo countries, as well as from South Korea. They work together. So in that area, the narrative is that modernity necessarily means Christianity. They did not have any model of being Hindu and modern, or Buddhist and modern, or animist and modern. Japanese culture was not streamed into Northeast India, but South Korean culture, South Korean Christian culture specifically, was. And of course, Western culture is. So that's one reason, is that if you want to be modern and you want to be like the most powerful countries in the world, then be Christian, right? The rest of them are complete losers. That's one big aspect of it. The second aspect of it is that the Hindu community, the animist community, the Buddhist community in that area, they're not well organized. It's mostly on autopilot. They're not well organized in instructing their new generations on how to carry the tradition forward. That is changing, but that's only just begun to change. But so far, that was not the case. So therefore, that has been an open area. It has been an area ripe for conversion.
Rajesh, do you want to answer that question?
I'm not getting into the detail whether it is modernization because of the Christianization over there. But the thing is that the first time it is happening in this country that the separatist and terrorist powers are openly demanding now a separate state. They say it is going to be a Kuki state. But if you say Kuki minus Christianity, nothing remains there. So now a demand of a Kuki state, which is being supported by people of Mizoram, people of Manipur, people of Myanmar, is a demand for a separate Christian state. So it is something, a very dangerous proposition, which is now emerging from there. So this conversion is impacting now the sovereignty, now the integrity of India.
Thanks, Rajesh. I agree with that, that there are larger forces. It's ostensibly portrayed as an intersect strife between Meitei Hindus and Christian Kukis, but they are larger geopolitical forces.
Yes, no doubt about it. The big game is there. The big game is being played over there.
And that's why we needed to discuss this, because the narrative that is being talked about in international media and Western-based human rights organization is totally devoid of any contextual information, historical information, and what is going on there, how the military coup in the state of Myanmar has affected this problem. And in fact, situation became so serious that I think in future, government of India has decided to put a boundary wall, a fence, and this 16 kilometers leeway that is given, probably that may be taken away. Ostensible reason for the current escalation of the conflict from May 2023 was State High Court in Manipur entertaining a public interest litigation and recommending to the central government that Hindu Meiteis be given tribal status.
That fueled
I mean,
everything.
such an innocuous thing. Meiteis are under India's laws considered OBCs. They already have an OBC status, and it was a public interest litigation that sparked this conflict. And one is left with wondering what is the thinking, what's the rationale behind that? So definitely it is superficially a religious conflict, but there are deeper forces there. And we need to understand, and we need to not blame the victims here. What is happening is victim blaming. People who are being persecuted, defenseless people without arms, who is confined to the central valley of Imphal, surrounding on hilly terrain, where even Indian army will not go, and with very sophisticated arms. And these Kuki fighters are continuing to infiltrate. As Rajesh, you said that in Mizoram, the population of Mizoram is only 1.2 million, 12 lakh. And if you have 30,000 trained fighters come over there, that changes the whole power dynamics, the governance of the state. So there are a lot of challenges. I hope this conflict is taken care of and traditional harmony in the country, in the region is maintained. But I don't want the Western-based human rights organizations to carry a one-way narrative and indulge in victim blaming that continues to happen. Looks like Rajesh wants to say something.
Yes, I just want to intervene. No, our organization is based in Delhi, New Delhi, and our organization president happens to Mr. R. Venkatramani, happens to be the Attorney General for India. So now, from the day one when this conflict started, and we have lot of cookies professors and teachers in Delhi University and Jawaharlal Nehru University. The very second day, there were two girls and one professor from Delhi University in my office. We want your support. And from that day onwards, every day there were letters, email representations we were receiving. For for about a month, there was not even a Meitei coming to our organization or any other human rights organization or authority saying that we are being persecuted. So unless you strategize your victimization, then to complain thereon that we are not being, because for about 2-3 months, every cookie intellectual was on their toes. They were approaching each and every, a media house, every channel, every human rights organization, all the judges, everyone, whosoever was important in Delhi was been targeted by them, and Meiteis was silent.
I will just end by saying that it is unfortunate that the two original panelists were cowed down, were threatened for the security of their families, for their personal safety.
So sad. Adityanjee. Thank you, Carl.